Hey everyone, it's Nico, and I've got a game here that I've been playing for the last few weeks or so, and it's a metroidvania title, and it's a game that I haven't seen like anybody talking about. To find it for myself, I just recently learned about it like a few weeks ago, and it released at the end of October of 2024, and it's only available on Steam and on PlayStation 5, so maybe that's why I didn't see this at all or haven't heard of it. But it's a really fun metroidvania title, so over the course of this video I want to discuss it, the positives, the negatives, kind of where I think they're going with it, and we'll decide if this is a hidden gem or not by the end. Now, when you start the game out, it does start a bit slow, and it takes some getting used to in that it's very linear, and you're kind of confused on what the narrative is. There's a lot of mechanics they have to introduce to you because it has a very complex combat system, which is definitely a good thing, but we'll get to that in a second. So it's one of those games where if you play it for like an hour and that's it, and then you're like, this is just okay, and then you move on, like you really didn't give it a fair shot at that point. So this is definitely a game going in that you need to understand. You probably have to give it a few hours before it really, goes from 0 to 60 and gets into the fun part of the game. It's a little bit bland in the beginning, and I think that might hurt it for players like on Steam that maybe only give a game half hour, 45 minutes, an hour of their time and then just move on if they don't like what they played. So that was like needed to be a little bit better in the beginning, but anyways. So the story in this will follow Tanya, which is the titular character that you're going to play as. And what I could say about the story without spoiling anything is it felt very different than what I'm used to, and it takes you on a bit of a roller coaster ride. And as much as I really wanted to be invested in the story, there's times where they're presenting you with story sequences, and I'm kind of like checked out on what's going on. And the reason being is that sometimes there's music in the background during story sequences, and sometimes there's not. Other times there's voice acting, and then other times there's not. But there's these moments where you're watching like a critical scene play out, and it's just silence. There's just nothing. There's no sound, dialogue, audio of any kind. And I don't know if this is a bug or if this is intended. Maybe they didn't have the budget to do more voice acting. Maybe they didn't have music that felt appropriate there. I don't know what the reason is for these, but it made it difficult to pay attention to certain key sequences of the story. So that's something that I definitely didn't like. But the narrative as a whole, being able to see it play out, is something that I did enjoy. And since I mentioned the audio and these sections, I do also want to mention the visuals. Sometimes the visuals in these is also kind of lackluster. Like they almost look like they're rough drafts. They're a little bit pixely, and I don't know how to describe it, but they're not as clear as they probably should be when you're telling the story. But anyways, the visual aesthetic as a whole is something that I liked as I played through the game. It ran really smooth. It looks really nice, so I liked it overall. And then the main part of the game is the combat. This is very clearly the focus in the area that they put the most attention to detail into, because it is unlike any combat system that I have personally played in any Metroidvania, and I mean that in a good way. A lot of the time, you'll usually have like one or two attacks. Maybe sometimes you can chain attacks together, like do air juggles and things like that. But in this, there's such a focus on the combat. Immense amount of variety that you can do with your attacks, because you have 3 different weapons, which you will obviously start out with just one, but you will eventually have 3 total. And it's not one of those situations where you go in the menus and you equip a weapon, and then if you want to use one of the others, you swap it out. You can freely switch between your weapons on the fly during combat, and it encourages you to do this. Like, you can chain together certain attacks by switching weapons and trigger all these powerful effects. The game does a great job of explaining these, and I couldn't possibly explain it as well as the game does. So just trust me on this, that there is a lot to it, and that if you just stick with one weapon, which you can absolutely do if you don't want to switch and you have one favorite, but it does encourage you to mix and match your attacks, your air juggles, your ground attacks, your dodges, and you can also parry in this. You can do your typical dash dodge, but it also has a parry system, and if you trigger like one of these with perfect timing, it will go into this witch time effect, that's similar to like Bayonetta, where time slows down briefly and you can let loose a wicked combo. So it rewards you not only offensively, but also defensively if you time your dashes just right, or if you parry just right. And all of this is complemented by its upgrade system. You're always earning XP in this. There's little plants that'll give you these ether orbs, which are red. I'm sure you've seen them in the gameplay already. This is how you earn XP. And you can use these to do a variety of different things. These are not just your XP, but also your currency in the game, where you can buy items in a shop. There's only one shop in the entire game, and there's technically only like one town, which kind of serves as your hub that you'll eventually get to a few hours in. But you use these little orbs to upgrade your character. There's two parts to your skill tree. There's like an active one, and then there's also a passive one. Then there's the shop, like I said. You also use these orbs to upgrade your weapons. Each of the 3 weapons has like their own little skill tree, and you can improve them in various ways. I really like the swords, and they also did poison damage once I upgraded them enough. So that was kind of what I relied on, but I did mix and match and switch between and chain together some really satisfying combos, and that made the combat for me personally to be the hook that kept me into the game, wanting to play it and play all the way through it. And not only did I play all the way through the game and beat it, I also played it some more after I finished it. Unlocked the remaining achievements, got the second ending because it has multiple endings, and just overall had a blast with it and wanted to share it because the game's got less than 500 reviews on Steam. I mean, that to me is hidden. Maybe you have a different definition of hidden, but to me, if a game has less than 500 reviews on Steam and I don't see literally anybody talking about it, yeah, that's a pretty hidden game. It's pretty forgiving in those moments where you do die, because the boss fights are pretty difficult. You'll respawn typically at your last save point, and there's a ton of save points. Almost always there's one right before a boss, so you won't lose a ton of progress. And although I did die a few times playing through the game, just in general, most of the time I died on the bosses, which are pretty difficult. And you might run into an instance here or there where maybe you get to a boss and you can't beat it because you're technically not powerful. You can eventually fast travel pretty freely around the map so that you can go explore areas you missed, and I had to do that a few times. I can't really think of a boss that overly frustrated me, but there is one in particular that feels a bit unfair. But overall, the boss fights are really well done. And I would say, as a whole though, the enemies are probably the weakest point of the game and the combat aspect of it, because you fight a lot of the same enemies, and I think they're lacking a bit of variety in that sense. They have mostly pretty generic enemies and pretty generic attack patterns, so when you're in a particular biome for a while, you might get a little bit sick of fighting kind of the same handful of enemies over and over. So my first recommendation would probably be to make a few more enemies. If they decide to do more add-on content or something like that, which might be something they're exploring, I'm not entirely sure. They have updated this game quite a bit since it released, so I'm fairly certain, based on the Steam reviews, that it's trending upward in the positive range, whereas the reviews in the beginning weren't necessarily negative, but weren't as positive as they are now. So they do continue to improve it. They have added like costumes for your character. There's a bunch of different costumes you can unlock in various ways playing through the game, and they have added more of these as well. So they are actively seeking to keep improving the game. So much so that there's actually a little note from the developers, like when you beat the game, letting you know, like, hey, let us know, give us your feedback, the good and the bad. We poured our heart and our soul into this. So I really did appreciate that. And I did feel that while playing through this, that a lot of love went into the game, even in the parts of it that maybe aren't as polished as they could be. It took me about, I think, like 11 or so hours to just beat the game. And then I sank in another like 2 or 3 hours to finish completing it, acquire all the upgrades, finish the side quests I missed, get the second ending, and all that sort of like bonus content stuff that if you just play through it, when you roll the credits, you're done, you'll miss out on. So expect somewhere probably between like 14 to 15 hours if you want to complete this, which I think for the price that they're asking is pretty fair. And if you enjoy playing games on the higher difficulty settings and unlocking literally everything, like all the cosmetics, it will require you to play on the higher difficulties to get some of the costumes. And I believe it does have a new game plus, so you can carry over your progress, I'm fairly certain. So there's a lot here. And the game reminded me a lot of one that I played last year that I really enjoyed, which was After Image. So since this one is not available on Nintendo or Xbox consoles, if you only have those and you haven't heard of After Image, maybe check that one out instead, since that's on everything. They have a very similar style, but this one has a much better combat. It doesn't drag on quite as long as After Image did. After Image felt a bit padded. But if you want to see more on that, check out my best indie games of 2023 video. I'll have a link in the description below. I covered After Image in that one. So, do I think AWAKEN Astral Blade is a hidden gem? Honestly, I feel like it's more of a diamond in the rough than a hidden gem. It's definitely hidden, but it does have some weak points to it that I don't necessarily feel like it's a, oh my god, you must play this. But you should if you enjoy Metroidvanias, and even more so if you enjoy the combat aspect of games as much as I do. Like, to me, that's always the draw. Sure, if it has a good story, like, I appreciate that. But the highlight of almost any game that has combat, to me, is that aspect. And here, it's stellar. Like, I'm not kidding when I say I think this is the best combat that I've ever played in a Metroidvania. Usually they're kind of like hack and slash-ish. You know, okay, maybe you dodge around and you have 2 different attacks. And you do mostly do your attacks with just 2 buttons. I played on the Xbox controller, so the X and the Y buttons. But the way you chain them together and it incentivizes you to use different combos, switch your weapons on the fly, and all these sort of things made it really satisfying to defeat the bosses and level up my character and become more powerful. And then when you're exploring, there's always so many different types of things you can acquire. There's a whole bunch of different materials that you can find in the world that allow you to upgrade like your flask capacity or how much healing it does. Also increase the amount of equipment that you can wear, because in this game you don't wear like armor and then like a ring and then a necklace. No, you just basically have one pool of accessories, and these each have different values, and you can equip them based on these values. You'll have a maximum amount, like say 50. So if you have a 30 and a 20 accessory, you can equip both of these. If you have one that's a 50 and you really like that one, you could just equip that one. But then you can upgrade that capacity. There's a lot of capacity upgrades, health, like I said, flask, things like that. But there's just so much to do that it felt like searching every nook and cranny of the world was really rewarding. And that, I think, was the hook. The exploration and the combat. So I would say that this is more of a diamond in a rough than a hidden gem. But I don't know. If you played this, let me know in the comments below if you felt like this was a hidden gem. Have you heard of this game? Are you interested in it now that you've seen my coverage on it? All these things. I want to know the answers to everything. Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video on AWAKEN Astral Blade. If you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you already are subscribed, just know that I appreciate you being here. But until next time, Have a good one.